Yo, what's good YouTube? It's boardzy, and this is going to be a review of none other than the Razer Deathadder V2 X Hyperspeed. I saw somewhere, I believe it was Twitter or Reddit, that said this was the 27th Deathadder iteration that has released. That is absolutely insane, but I think it is one of the better ones, and the easiest way to describe it is imagine the specs of the Razer Orochi V2, but with the Deathadder shell. It's only $60. This has the best clicks out of any Deathadder I've ever used. It does have a removable top shell, so I'll talk about that later. And of course, compare it to the Deathadder V2 Pro, which has the Focus Plus sensor and optical switches. But yeah, there's a lot to cover with this mouse, surprisingly, including how, it's pretty shit in terms of weight out of the box. And that is because this mouse does use batteries, which I know some people are completely against. But I'll show the weight differences. So with the stock AA battery that's provided, this mouse weighs 101 grams. With the AAA lithium battery that I put in, it's only 85, which is actually 3 grams lighter than the Deathadder V2 Pro. So this can be the lightest Deathadder wireless. I'm sure there are mods you can do with a hearing aid battery to somehow get it to a lower weight, but the AAA lithium battery, it's the most simple way to do it. A lot of people have these lying around if you've owned a G305 in the past and weight reduced it. So that is my recommendation. I'll leave a link to them in the description because it is a much better experience than the 100 gram out of the box weight, which is also front heavy, but you see with the AAA battery, it is perfectly fine in terms of balance, and I like the weight a lot. So if you are a Deathadder owner and you have one of the old heavy wired versions, this is for $60. I would say it's a very good buy. The Deathadder V2 Pro is down to only 85 for the mouse itself, and if you are somebody who does literally want every bit of performance, then yeah, this is probably my recommendation. And the reasoning for that is because even though differences in terms of what you'll actually notice are subtle, the Deathadder V2 Pro does have the Focus Plus 20K sensor and optical switches, which are by nature a faster response than the mechanical switches found in the Deathadder V2 X Hyperspeed. Holy shit, I hate these names. Even though the response is technically faster with the optical switches in the V2 Pro, the overall click feeling on the Hyperspeed is far superior. It's using the same switches that were in the Orochi V2, Razer's modified version of the GM 4.0s. But the implementation of these clicks on the Hyperspeed actually feels better than the same switch on the Orochi V2. So that is something to keep in mind. I think that these are very high tier in terms of click feeling. It's like perfect amount of post travel. It doesn't feel mushy at all. A good satisfying click, and the in-game response felt fine. When I was comparing these mice head to head, I was able to notice a slight improvement with the Deathadder V2 Pro. The switches are lighter and thus easier to spam, and they do have the faster registration. Does that make sense? But yeah, the Hyperspeed, it is a slightly heavier click, but if you've been used to Omrons, I would say this is a step up in most cases. They also have these two buttons at the top. These function as DPI buttons by default. You can change it to whatever you want. I figure like a media key or maybe a macro. I don't know. You are not going to be able to hit these when gaming, even if you palm grip. They are just like on a slightly different layer. I don't know how easy it'll be to see, but yeah, you can't use these as an in-game bind, or at least I wouldn't think it would be comfortable, but there's always going to be that person who's like, I use it. One thing to consider though is even though the clicks have been perfect in these initial few days of testing, since it is using a removable top shell design, by nature, the more you remove it and put it back on, it's like slowly going to degrade the clicks. I will give Razer credit though, because they have 3 magnetic contact points versus the Orochi where they only have 2. And it does feel much more secure with this Deathadder design. I'm not sure if there's other factors responsible for that as well. The general build quality on the V2 Hyperspeed is very good. You would have to put a ton of pressure to notice any side flexing or creaking. Even if you press towards the bottom where it connects, like I said before, it does feel very secure. The only issue I would say there is a lot of side-to-side play on mouse 1. Once again, this isn't something that has affected me in game, and it doesn't even feel like it's grinding, but the movement is there, so maybe it will get worse with time. But overall, the click feeling is still very satisfying and snappy, like I mentioned before. I'm going to quickly compare the sound of the clicks, the mechanical switches versus the opticals. You can practically hear the mush. Now moving on to the side buttons, these are excellent. The Deathadder has a great side button design with the positioning and the large size of the buttons. I believe it's using the same switches as the main clicks, the modified 4.0s, so they are a bit heavier and just perfectly tensioned. No pre-travel, no post-travel, perfectly spammable for Fortnite. As you can see, the buttons do protrude more on the V2 Hyperspeed than the Deathadder V2 Pro, so it's another thing to consider. The reason for that is because it does not have the rubberized side coating. This is the same coating as the Orochi, feels like a PBT keycap almost, slightly chalky but very good for grip and no issues with sweat on it, at least in my experience. The sensor is perfectly fine for FPS. It is only a 14K optical of their 5G advanced sensor, while the Orochi is using an 18K DPI version. I seriously can't understand what the differences are. The input feels the same. A bit of noticeable DPI deviation at 1600. This was especially noticeable when I compared it to the V2 Pro with the Focus Plus sensor. I also noticed that there's a higher degree of motion clarity with the Focus Plus, which is why I said if you want every bit of performance, I would recommend the Pro. The LOD is on the higher end, same as the Orochi V2. I don't think you can get it under 2 millimeters, unlike the V2 Pro where you can get it to 1. But that's really about all. There's just a few other features to cover. I mean, the scroll wheel, it's the exact same. If you've used a Deathadder scroll wheel, you know what this is going to feel like. Oh, there's Bluetooth for all of the Bluetooth enjoyers. These mouse skates are the same as the other PTFE Deathadder skates. They glide pretty well. If you have a textured pad like the any Hien clone, maybe the Razer Strider, I think you'll prefer that because this is still a heavier mouse at 85 grams, even after you put the modded battery in. So I would recommend using a faster pad if that's what you're used to. Looking at the mouse as a whole though, for $60, this is a great value. I'm mainly going to be recommending it to people who already have a Deathadder and you're looking for a wireless version at a good price of only $60. I think the Orochi is down to $50 as well. Razer's really fucking making some affordable wireless mice. So yeah, if you have large hands and palm grip, or you already know that the Deathadder shape is going to work for you, I personally, why is that happening? Fucking slam clicking. Never mind, this mouse slam clicks, it's terrible. But yeah, that's really who the mouse is going to be for. If you have small hands, probably not my recommendation, but at $60, little to complain about. That's going to be all for this video. This was not sent out by Razer. I literally bought it at a Micro Center because that's how bad the mousetrap is. Putting that aside, that's really all I have to say about this mouse. Not getting the seal of approval, but I was still very surprised by it and can recommend it to Deathadder owners. But trust me, okay, that slam clicking is getting annoying. Get the batteries that I have linked in the description if you want the lower weight, because it's literally over a 15-gram difference just by swapping out the default battery. But yeah, if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because I will be here when the 28th version of the Deathadder releases, and I will review that as well. But yeah, peace.